All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started with our afternoon session. We hope everyone had a terrific lunch break, enjoyed the food truck and the socializing and the opportunity to connect with colleagues. I've really enjoyed the discussion so far, and I hope you all have too. So we're going to do everything possible to prevent the post-lunch coma at this point by bringing you some pretty interesting and short, kind of succinct presentations. So we have 45 minutes to talk first about identifying PFAS in communities. And then we have another 45-minute session around communication around PFAS. And then we will conclude with sort of a next steps and wrap up. So as we look at the afternoon, there's no formal break, but please recognize that we will end not at 3 o'clock sharp. We're going to end actually before 3 o'clock so that there's time for us all to talk as we want to linger in the halls, talk some more. Because people always tell us after these kinds of events, and I'm sure you all have these experiences, that the best conversations are the ones held in the hallways and in the corridors. So we want to make sure those can happen. So I'm really delighted to be introducing a panel of experts. I am merely the facilitator for this. This panel is based on a panel that was held at the National Summit in Washington, D.C. And we are focusing on different strategies and techniques for identifying PFAS in a community. We heard some of this in the morning discussions, but we're going to dive a little deeper now into this. And I am pleased to identify our three speakers who will introduce themselves. They're listed on your agenda. We have Brian Getz, Deputy Director of Public Works with the City of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, one of the first people who emailed me about this summit and said he wanted to be a part of it. So glad that it worked out, Brian. Tom Camberry, I hope I said that right, Tom? Cambareri. I left out a syllable. Water Resources Technical Services Director from the Cape Cod Commission. And Nick Nunes, who we heard from this morning. Welcome back, Nick. You gave a preview of your presentation earlier, so you've kept us in suspense. Project Manager with the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management. So, Brian, are you going to be our first presenter?
Sure.
Welcome.
Okay, let me advance here and get the mic set. There we go. Okay. Well, yes. Thank you for allowing me to speak. It's been tried to make it down to Washington, and that just a full room there. So glad to be here, and glad to be here with the Region 1 Summit, and to give a little bit of experience on the water supply side of everybody this morning with Andrea and other Testing for Peas presentations. A very good presentation with backgrounds and some of the issues, especially on the health side. I'm going to talk on the water system side of things, and then also identifying PFAS. Overall, the focus on that topic itself. And the other thing too is, as I look out, I see some familiar faces, and it's been well attended here. I think back at the 4 years that we've been dealing with this, and 4 years ago when I got that call from Brandon Kernan at DES saying, the Haven Well's over the advisory limit, Brian, maybe you ought to shut the well off. We shut the well off. I didn't envision that 4 years later here we'd be having a summit on this issue. There wasn't a room full of people like this to turn to about PFAS. In fact, it was one of those, as I'm sure most everybody in this room said when they first heard about what is PFAS. At the time it wasn't even called PFAS. We're all saying that term now, PFAS. For the first couple of years it was PFCs. We've expanded it because we know it's a larger family. But the P's experience, when 4 years ago, there was no Hoosick Falls, there was no Merrimack, there was no Kennebunkport. And of course, now we know, unfortunately, the family of those communities and water systems affected has grown. And there was also very little info. I mean, I scrambled, I worked, with Brandon, I worked with, Sarah Pillsbury at DES and other staff folks, Mike Wimsat at the Waste Management Division. I mean, we were all on the fast track with trying to get information on this issue that now, it's a click away to get, tons of information. It wasn't the case 4 years ago. So what I'd like to do is, just give you a little bit of snapshot before I talk about identifying PFAS, is just, the timeline again. It's been covered well in what testing for Ps has said, but essentially on May 12th, 2014, got the call. The Haven well was shut down. There are 2 other wells serving the Ps trade port that continued to be on. They had lower level detections below the health advisory, and Portsmouth Water was able to supplement the water lost from the Haven well, which isn't always the case. Other communities that have had to go to bottled water, they didn't have alternate supplies and stuff. Fortunately, we did. The Ps trade port water system is a independent water system of the City of Portsmouth, but the City of Portsmouth operates both of them. So, there's been extensive monitoring. I'll get into that a bit more. In July 2015, the EPA issued an order to the Air Force, the responsible party in this instance, because of the firefighting foam of the former Pease Air Base. And that order said, 2 things: you have to clean the aquifer, and secondly, treat the drinking water wells. So we're in the process of working on that. And we have activated carbon filters on the Harrison and Smith wells, the 2 wells that are still active. And we're in design right now for a final treatment system that will incorporate all 3 wells. And we expect within a couple years to have it online. So this is a very busy slide. If others have seen me present, I use a lot of slides and go quick. Since I had 10 slides, I had to consolidate here, so I'm putting a lot of information on one slide. But essentially, what has happened in these 4 years, there was a press release issued, we had a public meeting, we announced this, again at the time, what information we knew. Again, retrospectively, we know more than we did then, but we did our best together with the partners at the Department of Health and Human Services, the Waste Division, DES, EPA, and then the federal and state delegation. I know Senator Shaheen had a nice little intro for us yesterday, but they were instrumental. They were Senator Shaheen, former Senator Ayotte, now Senator Hassan, then Governor. They were all instrumental. They were very good. Our local politicians, Senator Fuller Clark is here, very supportive of us, very helpful. I know listening to Testing for Peace folks too on the health side. So we can't say enough about the help that has been given through the political support we've had, and what we think is reasonable for our federal agencies, our state agencies to actually provide for us. So that is great. And out of that, these other, sidebars. There's been blood testing, a lot of public meetings on that issue, and, continued look at the health side. There's a community assistance panel that meets quite often now and continues to address it on the health side. The Restoration Advisory Board was reopened up for the there at Ps. In fact, we got a meeting tomorrow night, so I refer to this week as PFAS week because tomorrow night we'll continue with more meetings on this, but it just happened to fall on the time frame of the public, every quarter for that. And there's extensive information, so there's a lot of information. I mean, if what I say today isn't inclusive enough, go ahead, cityofportsmouth.com website, and go to the water section. We do our best to try to get info out. Al Pratt and Jesse Pierce, they're back there somewhere. Put your hands up. Thank you, Jesse. Yes. My helpful staff couldn't do all this stuff without them. We've done extensive work, they have especially, at the request of our public to get more information out there. We've done our best. I think I spoke last night how complicated it is to get the message out, but we're doing our best. We're always open to you know, suggestions and improvements. We've got much more detailed water quality reports. We just released our recent one, and we're trying to do our best on the website to get info out there as well. We're also looking at other treatment systems. So, you know, the first thing I did was like, well, where else are they treating for this? So we piloted activated carbon. But then questions came up, is carbon really the panacea? What about short chain compounds? What about the life of that? So we actually looked to resins. We, fortunately, the Air Force was agreeable to piloting resins. And ironically, they work really good for this water. But, you know, all waters are different. So you do need to pilot, you need to test, you need to prove it out. So we've done that. And the final treatment system, as you can see, it's a small photo, but it'll be an expansion of the building there. Is including resin filters with carbon. So the team, so I hope if, you know, apologize if I missed anyone here on the technical side, but what you see here is a snapshot of what has been many meetings, a lot of behind the scenes technical work. The Air Force civil engineering firm has been great. They've really come to the plate with their consultants and their efforts to help address this. EPA Region 1 has been excellent. Mike Daly, New Hampshire DES, Scott Hilton is back there somewhere. Scott, put your hand up. There he is, Scott and Peter Sandin. The Drinking Water Program, Brandon Kernan, Sarah Pillsbury, Rick Skarenka. These, you know, we get together, we have these meetings. And it's not just a get-together meeting. I mean, we're going through data. We're talking about hydrogeo and just tons of very complicated information. So what do we do? Identifying this. So this is a busy slide, but essentially others have talked about this. The third unregulated contaminant rule, 2012 told larger water systems they needed to sample for 6 compounds. Well, when we gathered, Brandon Kernan at his suggestion said, well, we should look for more than 6 compounds. So he reached out, he found a lab that could do 23 and also go to lower detection limits. So we did that, and for 4 years now, we have a data set. It's over 1,000 data points of sampling. Initially, it was every week, but now that we have a long enough sample point, there's monthly and some quarterly sampling going on. There's questions of the fate and transport and plumes and all the rest. At present, doesn't seem like there's a discernible plume and no increasing trends in the wells. Things go up, they go down. They are a bit seasonal, but again, you know, it's not a big upward trend. And then a lot of hydrogeologic modeling. And of course, as we get this, we do our best to post data. If anybody's a data geek, again, go to the city website and you can see those 1,000 sample data points, and we do our best to get that info out there. So identifying PFAS, I know it's been talked about. This graphic here on the left shows kind of the issue we're talking about that some people have talked about. I've talked about this before. So all of us, including City of Portsmouth, part of the UCMR sampling, had a method, and that method had 20 parts and 40 parts per trillion as the reportable method. Well, as you can see from the graph here, if you go into the 20 part per trillion and you go into 40, this is a Portsmouth well and an adjacent well in the southern area of the Pease trade port. But these are sample results of the Portsmouth well, and as you can see, they're a bit up and down. These are monthly results and then the trend for 4 years. But these first few on the left side are all non-detect, and those are all non-detect because the reportable limits for those were the 20 and the 40. Well, since they weren't at 20 and 40, they weren't reported. But when we sampled using the lower detection limits, you can see some of these lower limit results. So again, we could have 4 years of sampling all using the UCMR, and we would have 4 years of non-detect. That's not the case now. So here in Portsmouth. Thanks again to Brandon Kernan for providing this information. Again, a lot of this evolves and grows, but so here's an example overall in Portsmouth, in New Hampshire itself. 23 simple systems were sampled under UCMR 3. Only 3 of 23 had reportable detections. DES sent out a letter in 2016, said to these systems, can you resample, and can you resample at the lower limits? So 15 of those simple systems have resampled. 12 of them now have detections. So we've gone from 3 systems, or 13% using the UCMR, to 12 systems, or 80% now. And New Hampshire's been very comprehensive in what they've done. They have, some people say, well, New Hampshire's the worst in the nation because we have all this contamination. Well, New Hampshire has sampled for stuff. It was mentioned in the panel here, if you suspect you have contamination, you're going to find it. And that is really the case in New Hampshire, as you can see from the map, all the dots on the map and the places that they've gone and looked at that. Essentially, if you suspect a site, it has a history, chances are you unfortunately are likely to find it. And now that's expanded out to, air deposition, car washes, fire departments with their own wells. And so lastly, the fire department thing. So how do you identify PFAS in your community? So it's a simple question. If someone was asked me that, I would simply just say this: sample for it. And why would I say that? Well, Leanne Atwell, Leanne, are you in here as well? I ran into her outside. So Leanne made a presentation for DES. I was there. I was looking at it. She says, oh, we looked at some fire departments. They have their own fire equipment. They have their own well. So we figured, well, we better go out and talk to them and sample. So she puts this graphic up, and I'm sitting in the audience, and I said, oh, that's Kingston. And I used to live in Kingston. Here's the fire department. There's my house that I used to live in for 11 years. It's got a yellow dot. So Brandon sends me the results, 11 part per trillion. What do you know? Does that house have a responsible party? Do I think it came from the fire department? Probably not. Is it from the lake there? Probably not. Everybody around me has septic. So, there's a study on Cape Cod saying this stuff can come from septic, 11 parts per trillion. It's not real. Doesn't take a whole lot to get to that limit. But, my wife, daughter, and I, dog, we lived in that house for 11 years, and lo and behold, had a little detection. So if there's any take home, I would say that. It's like, if you want to know if you have PFAS, sample for it. So thank you. Am I introducing the next person?
We're going to go ahead and hear from all the speakers, and then we'll hopefully have time for a question or two. Thank you so much, Brian. Next, we're going to hear from Tom Cambereri.
Good afternoon. Nice to be here. Thank you very much, Alexandria, for the opportunity, your staff, and Megan Cassidy. It's good to reconnect with Jim Murphy and other EPA folks that I got to know very well from the early years of the cleanup of the Massachusetts Military Reservation as a technical advisor to that from the county. I've also been the cleanup manager for a site that I'm going to tell you about, the Barnstable County Fire Rescue Training Academy, for about 28 years. So I'll share some insight with you on that in regards to how we go about identifying PFAS in our community. So it says I'm from the Cape Cod Commission. Well, what is that? The Cape Cod Commission was established in 1990 from the concerns about rampant overdevelopment in the 80s. So who didn't see rampant overdevelopment in the 80s? We did. We were able to establish the Cape Cod Commission as a land use regulatory agency. We have a staff of about 35 to 40 folks with professionals in a lot of different issue areas. I manage the water resource program, and that's the goal of our water resource program, is to maintain a sustainable supply of high quality, untreated drinking water. Surely, you should be able to do that in what is the most bountiful aquifer on Cape Cod. You know, you should be able to try to sustain that goal. So this is a water table contour map of Cape Cod. You may all be familiar with water table contours. The flow is perpendicular to it, so we have radial flow out from these 6 separate lenses. The aquifer on Cape Cod is comprised of permeable sand and gravel. It was designated a sole source aquifer under the Safe Drinking Water Act in 1982. It is our sole source of drinking water. And it also feeds the kettle hole ponds and ultimately discharges to our surrounding embayments. The primary wastewater infrastructure on Cape Cod is septic systems. 85% of the developed parcels have septic systems. They leach nitrogen, which has caused significant eutrophication to the near coastal waters that are sensitive to nitrogen. Alexandria, you'll be joining us down on the Cape in August.
Yes.
to talk about it at our One Cape conference.
Mm-hmm.
In addition, each septic system, besides nitrogen, is a source of contaminants of emerging concern. Focused studies on PFAS by researchers have found PFAS in wastewater effluent, septic effluent, and down gradient private wells, in downgrading of freshwater ponds that are down gradient of high density residential areas, and as you can guess by the arrows, in near coastal waters as well. The research is kind of at the tip of the iceberg on this, but we are finding these detections at these numerous distributed places. So the source of PFAS are not only DOD, industrial, commercial, but the infrastructure sources that serve us individually and collectively contribute as diffuse sources, and the infrastructure redistributing PFAS throughout the system. So, identifying PFAS. We were given a heads up back in 2009. The Silent Spring Institute, a great agency based in Newton, here in Massachusetts, had a opportunity and funding to evaluate compounds of emerging concern in 20 public water supply wells. So the bar graph you see there is the results of the testing that Silent Spring did. There was no regulatory driver for testing for these things, but we knew they were out there. We spent a lot of time talking about them. When were we ever going to find out about it? Well, Silent Spring did that for us, and that was our heads up. And of the 20 wells, 41% of them identified PFAS. At that time, it was PFOS, and PFOS was found at half, in some occasions, at half the health advisory level at that time. The health advisory level was 200 parts per trillion, so it was less than that. Phew. Little did we know, what would happen many years later. So it wasn't until laboratory analysis became available from commercial labs 4 years later that we were able to confirm and evaluate the potential sources hinted at in the 2019 research. Excuse me. The wells that they found were in the Hyannis area, and I've lived in the Hyannis area for 13 years, so we drank the water, me and my family. So far, we're good all so far, but it's a little disconcerting when, with my daughters of childbearing age. So it's an issue, and it's one you feel in your gut. This map shows the wellhead protection areas to Cape Cod's water supply wells. There's 160 gravel pack wells that pump over 10 billion gallons a year. The major well field in Hyannis was installed early in the last century, like around 1908 or something like that. In the Hyannis area case study that I'm going to talk about, the Mary Dunn wells are located down gradient of the Barnstable Fire Training and Rescue area. So that is the little blue rectangle in front of the wells. The wells are down gradient. And then there's that airport, the Barnstable Municipal Airport, that is up gradient of a huge water supply well field for the town of Hyannis, the original one. And that's the Mar Well Station. This talk will be a story about the county of Barnstable, how it reacted to and responded to this occurrence of PFAS, and also the town of Barnstable. So the county of Barnstable within the town of Barnstable, and if you can see the town boundaries there, that's the town of Barnstable is one of the larger ones in there. And today we have with us in the audience is Jack Units, who's the county administrator from the town of Barnstable. And so people like Jack, the town manager of the town of Barnstable, Mark Ells, and the elected county commissioner, Leo Kahunas, were instrumental in moving the county and the town forward through this situation. So here's a vintage video of activities from 1966 at the training academy. So we have a variety of different information about its use, and the last reported foam that I tested out there was in October 2015. That's a foam booth. Got it? A foam booth. All right. So let's get into a little bit of hydrogeology. This is a slide that shows the training academy and the downgradient of public water supply wells. Groundwater flow is well documented from the site. From this site, I've assessed and remediated plumes of petroleum compounds, MTBE, perchlorate, and I never thought I'd see another one, but we did. PFAS. In 2013, the commission staff first were able to sample the site for PFAS, and guess what? We did find PFAS in the groundwater. This is the groundwater flow map overlaying of the map, and the particle path there shows the path from the site is directly towards the Mary Dunn wells and mostly the Mary Dunn 2 well. That distance is 1,500 feet, and with groundwater travel, it's about 2.5 years from the site. This is what we knew at that time. So we said, okay, we got it in the groundwater. What are we going to do? We looked. And in 2013, this is our vintage map from 2014, we found the UCMR data. And so that's the findings of the UCMR data. The health advisory was 200 parts per trillion. And we were like, wow, good, well, the wells have it in it, but they're below. The town, the county reacted. We did a lot of testing, found in the spring that they were above. DEP and reacted in an excellent manner. The staff in the Southeast region, Angela Gallagher, Gerard Martin, and Gary Moran, were able to help the town evaluate the risk, and they moved forward and put treatment on those affected wells. Only 2 of them were above the limit at that time. And then the town adopted, then in 2016, another well was contaminated, and they moved forward and put treatment on the 3rd well. And this led the town kind of did this knowing that they had a responsible party in their target and that they sued the county. So the town was suing the county, of which it's a part. So it's all municipal taxpayer money kind of going into the same thing, but with a little difference. The county settled for $3 million and O&M for 20 years. We were ordered to do we were given an NOR, so ordered to do a comprehensive assessment. This map shows PFAS in the groundwater. In the red is over 2,000, and orange is 1,000. And the county installed an interim pump and treat at the toe of that plume. And initially, it was pumping 17,000 nanograms per liter. Right now, it's about 3,000 nanograms per liter. Another confounding factor from this site is the runoff from the site. And to the left, you can see an outline of a pond. That pond receives runoff, and the runoff has contaminated the pond. The average concentration over a period of time is about 1,000 nanograms per liter. So the kettle hole pond, if you know how those work on Cape Cod, is also a source, and you can see the orange line of 1,000 nanograms per liter leaving the pond area. So soil. What about soil? When we identify compounds, we've got them in wells, we've got them in the site, in the groundwater. Soils at the site are over 4,900 micrograms per kilogram, parts per billion. That's fairly high. The average concentration is 150. We've taken a look at the Connecticut advisory on soil that leaches in groundwater drinking areas, and that advises a concentration of 1.4 microgram per kilogram. So that's 10 times what we have there in the soil over that limit. So the lack of an MCL and site-specific criteria for PFAS compounds, both in the water and soil, have resulted in a pause of cleanup activities at the site and a resumption of training activities that involved use of water. The application of both training, water, and precipitation on this soil continue to leach compounds above the health advisory in an area 1,500 feet upgrading of a water supply. So I guess the question for this as we move forward, if your responsible party pursues and provides an alternative treatment for its site and addresses the exposure, public health exposures through drinking water, is it still required to, how much more is it required to do to clean up the site? And so that's something that I would like to leave you with, and I think it's a community discussion about that. And I'm just going to zip through to my last slide because I'm giving the hook. And there are other occurrences on Cape Cod of PFAS. One is at the Massachusetts Military Reservation here, and this was also a fire training area that thought was remediated back in the 90s. There's a vast plume of PFAS that flows through into this pond and out and has contaminated a well in Mashpee. This is the community Gary referred to as needing to clean this up but can't access the DOD money for it. Also, this is the site of a tank rollover in Bourne that happened 20 years ago. Work by DOD and AFSI have found that there are private wells down gradient that have been contaminated from a rollover that happened 20 years ago. This is the Barnstable Municipal Airport. And then also, this is just configuring the ponds that have PFAS in it, our coastal finger lakes, not lakes, but coastal waters, and private wells that have been tested also. So I think, yes, we need an MCL for this issue. Yes, we need guidance for groundwater and soil, and we also need reinvigorated use of communications and risk communications to the public so we can have a broader understanding, an idea about what moves we need to take, what are the compromises, and how do we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom. That was excellent. And you even primed the pump for the next session on communicating around PFAS when you talk about risk communication. But before that, we'd like to hear from our third presenter, Nick Nunes, Project Manager with Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management.
So thank you, Alex, for sparing me the introduction. And most of you probably already saw me this morning, but I'm grateful to be here to speak on behalf of Rhode Island and some of the initiatives that we've taken to kind of be proactive about PFAS and get ahead of it as much as we can. So just to start off, before PFAS really took off back in the latter half of 2016, prior to that, we had been dealing with it on one of our Superfund sites, the Newport Naval Station. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, at one point it was a very critical and large naval base and served a really big function in the overall fleet. They had a lot of fueling operations down there, and as such, with all the petroleum storage, there was also the need for fire suppression. And in particular, one parcel stood out. It was primed for transfer. We had a responsible party. We had a interested party who was going to take the land and pay for this petroleum cleanup. And right at the 11th hour, there was some sampling done for PFAS, and it kind of brought everything to a screeching halt. And they had levels in the tens of part per billion range out there, so definitely some significant concentrations. And since then, with some of the follow-up investigation on that base, we've been finding it essentially everywhere that we've looked. But as I mentioned earlier this morning, the one big step that we took to really get ahead of this was in the summer of 2017, we underwent a surveillance monitoring study of some of the smaller public water systems throughout the state of Rhode Island. And this was an initiative that our Department of Health started and was really wanted to initiate. And it was a collaborative effort with the Department of Environmental Management and also the Superfund Research Program at Brown University. Our Department of Health lab had worked to get certified to run their own samples, and I think by the time the study came around, they could run. I think they were running up to 9 different analytes, and the DEM and Brown University, we both worked to help identify all the potential sources throughout the state and which wells would be most likely to be impacted. And we were most concerned with those that were within 1 mile of a potential identified source. And so these are the sources that, first off, that the department looked at. We looked at airports, fire training areas. We looked at the EPA Tier 2 reporting. We considered any industrial facilities with certain NAAQS codes, all of our Department of Defense sites, our Superfund sites, certain electroplating operations, oil terminals, wastewater lagoons, both municipal and industrial. And also we had some limited information on some emergency response incidents where foam might have been applied as part of a truck rollover or something along those lines. And the team from Brown University, they also did their own separate geospatial analysis, which they started from a bare bones approach, really focusing on a lot of the similar sources, but they did consider some that we didn't, and I'll touch upon that later. And they also looked more at groundwater conditions. They looked at recharge zones, things of that nature. And the output of this study essentially was a raster map, a color-coded map of the whole state with the areas that were most likely to be impacted. And we took their study. They kind of gave us the top 10 areas that didn't overlap with ours, and that added some additional wells into our study. So this is the map of all the wells that were chosen. In the end, we ended up with about 40 public water systems, primarily smaller community systems, schools, childcare facilities, and also there's a few water bottling companies in the state that utilize their own private wells. And so 40 wells, 40 systems, approximately 60 wells in total we sampled. And as you can see, it ended up being a fairly decent distribution throughout the state. And so as far as the study results, this all took place in August and September, and we got the results in 26 of the systems came back below the method reporting limit, which was great news to us. However, we did have 8 systems that came back below half of the current EPA health advisory, which was kind of our threshold for taking action at that time. And so those those water systems, they ranged from 4 to 24 parts per trillion, and the average concentration was about 13. We had one system, which was actually one of the bottling companies, that came back at 40 in their raw water. And this bottling company was actually, it was located in North Providence, so a relatively urban area, so it wasn't that unsurprising. But they actually, fortunately, were already treating with granular activated carbon, so it looks like what was finally getting into the bottles was knocked down substantially, and since then they've connected to municipal water. But we did, unfortunately, get one public water system which did exceed the health advisory, and the way it worked, we actually ended up sampling this 3 times to confirm, because the first time it came back at 88 combined PFOA, PFAS. So we immediately went out, did a follow-up sample, and it came back just below 70. So we were ready to go, but just to confirm, we took one last sample. It came back at about, I think, 114 parts per trillion, and from there it was pretty much, we kind of needed to spring into action. So this is a map of the village of Oakland, Rhode Island, which is actually in the town of Burrillville, Rhode Island, which is kind of the northwest corner of the state for those of you who aren't familiar with it. And this map shows all of the private wells, which we ultimately sampled, in addition to the one public community well. And just to give you a kind of overall feel for the area, this village of Oakland is kind of surrounded by water on 3 sides. It's located at the confluence of 2 different rivers, which then flow out to the northeast. So looking at it, it's relatively hydraulically isolated, and the actual sources that we had identified as part of our mapping project that put this well on the map, there was a landfill, 2 landfills located to the northwest, but they were across the river and about 3/4 of a mile away, and also 2 industrial wastewater lagoons located across essentially 2 rivers, almost a mile to the south. So there wasn't really a smoking gun when we first kind of got news of the exceedance and took a look. But as we looked closer, there was a textile mill over off this corner here, which burnt down in the 80s. This is the actual Oakland supply well right here, which serves essentially all the houses on this road. Hope you can see that pointer all right. And that well serves approximately 175 individuals. There's not a ton of connections, but it's all multifamily homes, so it's pretty dense there. But smack dab in the middle of this map, you'll see right there is the Oakland Mapleville Fire Department. It's a local fire department, and when we saw that from the get-go, it kind of stood out, and we thought we might have our source right there. And so when this whole thing came about, we had a public meeting. We went out there the next day, and we were handing out bottled water to everyone in a 1/4 mile radius with a private well, everyone on the Oakland water system. And we were able to get approximately all of the 60 wells in that 1/4 mile radius of this village sampled within that first few days. And you can see from the results, we did have several private wells. The red dots exceed the 70 part per trillion health advisory. Initially, I think the highest level we had was about 200 parts per trillion in a private well, immediately adjacent to the fire department. The fire department wells also exceeded. Since then, the levels have remained relatively consistent, and there might be 1 or 2 dots that are now yellow, but no more reds where we're at right now. And let me just go to the next page here. So this is some pictures from the actual fire department when they went out to sample their well. They were nice enough to let us look around their garage, and I noticed immediately they had approximately, I'd say, 300 gallons of foam concentrate stored on the premises. And it looked like, it definitely wasn't the new stuff. This is a rural fire department, so they're not, dealing with these kind of fuel fire situations all the time. But nonetheless, they did have approximately 300 gallons of concentrate. If you can see in the picture, right there in the bottom corner, they're stacked up on either end of their garage bays, where I guess it was convenient, but it's right on top of a trench drain. And so since then, we've done subsequent investigation with the help of a technical assistance contract, and all that subsurface investigation did confirm our suspicions, and it looks like what actually happened was probably one of these containers, or well, a few of these containers maybe fell over or leaked just where they were. You can actually see in one of these photos, this one looks empty. And that's probably what we're thinking all it actually took. And an interesting point are, with our collaboration with Brown, they were able to take split samples of all the sampling that we did. They sent some of these out to get high resolution analysis out of the Colorado School of the Mines. And they were able to actually tell us which of these brands of AFFF, like the 3M foam versus the Ansel, which ones likely caused the release because of unique compounds that they already can pinpoint where they came from. So that was pretty amazing. But I will say overall, just to go back, where we're at with Oakland right now, we really lucked out in the sense that there is Burrillville's comprised of a lot of villages, and there's another municipal water system. The line runs right down in front of the fire station right now, and it actually feeds some of the neighborhood to the north. That system's far away, it's not impacted, and the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank was able to fund essentially hooking up the existing Oakland system to that line, as well as all the private well owners. So that the funding's in place, just the bids and everything's getting worked out, but right now everyone whose well is impacted above the health advisory is getting water regularly, bottled water provided by the DEM, and hopefully in the near future everyone will be on that municipal water system, which is not impacted. But if this were somewhere else, it might not have been such a simple resolution, especially when we're dealing with a PRP, who's a local fire department. So just quickly, some of the next steps, we're conducting some follow-up sampling of these private wells that had detections, but were below the 70 part per trillion threshold that we're utilizing right now. Right now we have the funding. We're moving forward with 2 investigations of these public wells. We pick the ones with the highest density of private wells in a quarter-mile radius, kind of a similar approach just to ensure that these detections weren't part of a larger problem, indicative of a widespread release, and to make sure that private well owners aren't being impacted. So I said we have 2 ongoing right now. We'd like to get all those detections, do some follow-up investigation to make sure we have the nature and extent of these issues defined. And our Department of Health is now considering another round of public well sampling. That first round hit approximately 1/3 of the smaller public water systems in the state, so there's still a lot to be done. And obviously this next time we've learned that I think we had initially not looked too closely at fire stations, just because, fire training area is one thing, but a fire station in and of itself with storage, you wouldn't have suspected. But the way Oakland worked out, that those containers were sitting right in that trench drain, which led out to a stormwater infiltration gallery under the parking lot, which was right on top of a bedrock lens, so it had a conduit directly into the groundwater to impact these wells. So even in a little rural area like this, the potential exists. So we'll definitely be considering that next time. And I will say Brown University did consider fire departments in their analysis, but Oakland would have been on there anyway due to the landfills, proximity of those and some of the other sources. But they did have Oakland as one big red dot. So their geospatial analysis, we'll definitely be working with them closely next time because that did have surprisingly good accuracy throughout the state. And so I mentioned these earlier, some of the other initiatives we're looking at is having our waste facilities management program is going to require all landfills to be sampled for PFAS. They're still fleshing out the details of that plan. It's a costly venture compared to their normal monitoring, so we're not sure how often it'll be, but they're working on that as we speak, and we're currently requiring it on all, that's my timer, all brownfields site remediation programs, and the site remediation program and brownfields program, which deals with state sites, we're requiring sampling where it's warranted, where there's a potential source now on any of the active sites. And that's it.
Great. Yep, so thank you so much, Nick. We're going to transition right to our next panel because I promise you we will end at 3 o'clock on time. So don't worry, we built some cush time in here. But as the next panel comes up, just want to thank our 3 speakers. There were some great takeaways there, including the very simple bumper sticker. How do you identify it? Sample for it. Also the request again for an MCL, groundwater and soil levels. And I really think Nick's presentation showed us about taking a broad look at the sources. So with that, our next panel on communication.
Yes, that's all right. All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm really thrilled to be hosting this panel on communicating about PFAS. As we've heard last night and today, every situation is different, and communicating about these situations is different. And the various states have various expertise and have had some real successes in communicating about this. So we'd like to open it up to our 3 panelists today who are going to get up and speak to you one by one. We have Lori Matthew from the Public Health Section Chief from Connecticut Department of Public Health. We have John Schmelzer from the Hazardous Site Manager for the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, and Karen Craver, who's an epidemiologist with New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services. So we're going to have Lori go first, and please welcome her to the stage. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Is it okay that I take this off?
Yeah.
Okay.
Whatever works for
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. My name is Lori Matthew. I'm the Public Health Section Chief at the State of Connecticut Department of Public Health. I am responsible for the drinking water section, and I manage a group of 50 professionals that oversee primacy of the Safe Drinking Water Act and a whole host of state laws that oversee public water systems in our state of Connecticut. So thank you so much, Deb and Jane Downing and Peter and Alex for inviting me here today and the health department to come and present and talk about what we've done so far and communicating with PFAS in the state of Connecticut and our interagency collaboration and our community outreach. So what I'm going to go over quickly, and I hope to get to the last few slides, which are really very important. And I see Andrea from New Hampshire in the audience, and I told her I was going to quote from her presentation, which I really liked the quote, "Nothing about us without us. Value community members. They are team players." And I can't echo that enough. People, human beings in the communities that are affected, need to be involved, and they need to be communicated with, and you need to tell them everything you know and everything you don't know, and be truthful and honest, and work together as a team, and put public health first. As a public health agency, that's what we work really hard to do every single day. So we're going to talk a little bit about our history, our history of testing. We're going to talk about our strategy. We have developed a strategy to move forward in our state, and what we've done with the pilot testing in the town of Greenwich, Connecticut, and what we've done with the community outreach in Greenwich, and the lessons learned from Greenwich and working closely with the community and the people that came to our public outreach session. So a little bit about what goes on in Connecticut with public water systems. We're a small state, and you should have, 2 or 3 water systems in our state, but there's over 2,500 public water systems. Most of those are small, non-community systems, 2,000 as a matter of fact. There are 550 community systems. You said, my God, we drive through your state, it takes 2 hours. What's the problem? Why so many small systems? Well, we have many rural areas in our state. If you go through the highways of 90, 91, 95, and 84, you see the cities, and then you see a lot of rural areas. We have a lot of rural areas with many, many wells. So there's 150 reservoir systems spread throughout our state and over 4,000 public wells. So that's a lot of wells to regulate and oversee as a drinking water section. And again, we have primacy of the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Health Department in Connecticut. So under the UCMR3, the good news is we had no detects. We did not find PFAS in our UCMR3 utilities. Now that doesn't cover every utility. It covers the large systems, the mediums, and some smalls. But that was the good news, that there were no detects above the minimum reporting limits. So that affected over 2.4 million people in the state of Connecticut. And we were happy with that, but we knew that we heard about Hoosick Falls. We pay attention to what's going on in other states. We work closely with our colleagues in EPA Region 1, Region 2, and ASDWA, which is the State Drinking Water Association of people like myself from across the country. We share information across states and work together. So we heard about Vermont and New Hampshire. We meet quarterly with Jane Downing of EPA as drinking water administrators. So we heard from Vermont and New Hampshire and what they were dealing with and what they were working on. So we knew we had to put together a strategy. And when EPA issued their health advisory back in 2016, our state toxicologists started working on looking at what EPA did and then thinking about what we should do in Connecticut and to formulate an action level. So we worked issuing some communication with our public water systems, telling them what happened with the UCMR3 results and what we are doing, which on our strategy. And if people remember 2016, there was another significant public health drinking water issue that happened. What happened in 2016 in January? Flint, Michigan. Can't forget that. That sent our drinking water programs into hyperspace. We were very concerned about what we were hearing about in Michigan and started focusing on the lead and copper rule. But as while that was happening, also PFAS was happening at the same time. This is just a map of Connecticut, and in purple are the areas served that represent the 2.4 million people. So you can see a lot of areas are not covered by the testing that happened. But the majority of our population, there's 3.5 million people in our state, 2.4 million people had received this testing, and that was the good news. But we knew there's a lot more private wells. There's about 350,000 private wells in our state that serve about 700,000 people. So there's a lot to do. So the strategy, we worked with our sister agency. I heard from Bob this morning from the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. We worked closely with their remediation staff on strategy development. Pat Pisacki, raise your hand. She's my staff. She works closely with staff from the DEP, and they work to draft a strategy, identifying areas where PFAS may have been released, similar to what you heard from Nick in Rhode Island. We did the similar analysis. We looked at what public water systems would be vulnerable. We developed information because we had no information to put up on our web pages, so we could share information with the public. And we proposed actions if PFAS was to be found. And we worked carefully and closely with, I believe, Jerry Weiss from EPA Region 1, who helped develop a tool, because we didn't even have a mapping tool to assist the states to identify areas that are vulnerable to PFAS contamination. So our strategy it's a tiered approach because we can't do everything. We don't have any staff or any funding. There is not one dime set aside in Connecticut to help us move forward with this. We don't have a fund that we can tap into, so we knew we had to take a careful approach, but we knew, hearing from other states, we needed to take action and come up with a strategy. So we have a draft strategy that looks at 3 tiers, and with a focus area. Tier 1 would be, if you know the contamination's there in the ground, look at 1 mile radius, and that's your priority area. Tier 2 is a little bit less of a priority, but within a mile radius of a facility that's known to have user release. And then Tier 3 is one that's types of facilities that are suspected to have releases. And then in the midst of developing this, we get a phone call. I get a phone call from Roger Skolkoll, my counterpart, the drinking water administrator with the state of New York, Department of Health. And I thank him very much for this call and the information they forwarded to us. They knew of contamination in the ground right on the Connecticut-New York border. So with my pointer, you can see that. So Greenwich is right down here, and the area where New York found the contamination is right on the border. Literally, there's a road that separates Connecticut and New York, and in the town of Greenwich, there were a number of wells that we identified, and the wells identified, there were quite a few. We had public wells, we had private wells. When I say quite a few, it's not 40 or 50. So we had maybe 6 public water systems and 10 private wells. So it's not significant numbers, but we had no idea how we were going to pull samples or how to do the sampling technique. No one has talked about, I find that extraordinary, no one has talked about the actual sampling, the way you have to pull the samples. It's not send anybody out to pull a sample and don't worry about cross-contamination. You have to worry about cross-contamination. We have no idea how to pull those samples. So in a short time, we worked together with a group of partners to understand how to pull those samples. We received training. As a matter of fact, Pat got trained and actually pulled the samples herself, and a number of other staff from other agencies learned how to do that in a short period of time. So we knew we had to work with our local health departments. In our state, I'm going to go back just one quick second. In our small little state, we have 73 local health districts and departments that we need to work with. And so in the town of Greenwich, they have a town health department. And the woman who is the health director, Caroline Baisley, couldn't make it here today. She wanted to be here, but she was wonderful to work with, and she is the expert of water quality in her town and knowing and understanding her community. So we know we needed to work with her directly and her team. So we developed a team approach of agencies and experts, and we included EPA in that discussion. We know we needed EPA, and we requested their help through Jane. And we worked, and Megan, and provided significant help and use of the Chelmsford lab. Without that, I don't know what we would have done. So providing educational information to all parties on treatment and health was important, and direct contact with people was so very important. These items on this sheet came right from my commissioner. Dr. Raul Pino, our commissioner of Department of Public Health, said, Lori, we're going to get together and we're going to talk about what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And these are things that he wanted done. He wanted direct contact with people. He wanted phone calls. He didn't take it that you have to leave a voicemail. He wanted us to talk to them directly. And so that was really very important. And it came to be incredibly important that we had that personal touch. And we held an informational session following the receipt of the results, and we provided information and updates. So the strategy is, let me pull this all down here. So here's the team within the health department, and I added the Greenwich Local Health Department as part of our team. They're a critical part of our team. So within the health department, we have a lot of experts. We have toxicologists that we work together, and there's been a lot of talk about the Connecticut PFAS. It's a sum of 5 PFAS and 70 parts per trillion. So we have 5, and we believe that that is very conservative. We worked closely with our toxicologists on public messaging. They're very good risk communicators. They're excellent risk communicators. And we work with our lab. Our lab helped us tremendously, but I'm very jealous about Rhode Island having the ability to sample for PFAS. So we need to work on that in our state. We work with our private well program, our lab certification program, and again, the local health department. So we pulled together information. We didn't have any information up on our webpage. We pulled together an FAQs, plain language. We've heard many people talk about plain language is important. The team approach. We coordinated with our sister agency. We coordinated with a couple of their programs, as a matter of fact. We requested assistance from Region 1, from the lab, from the contractor. There was an EPA contractor that helped us collect samples. And the team took 2 rounds of samples. Working together, we communicated the results and worked on the information. We had no funding available, and we learned and gathered information from other states again. Our strategy was to work with local health and through local health. They know the community that they serve. They provided to us invaluable input and guidance on the best way to communicate with their community, provided cover letters, and was a point of contact for the community. Organized the public availability session. Once the results were verified, we got together and went down to the town of Greenwich, and we called the people that were tested. We brought them to the table. We actually held the public availability session at a church that was actually part of the testing. And local health helped us with leading the media interaction, and they were invaluable, provided invaluable support. So again, it was held in the impacted community. We provided the personal touch. It was facilitated by the local health department. We staffed tables. It wasn't like this sort of setting. You walked in and we had a table for the health department, for the DEP, for the local health department, for our toxicologists. So if you wanted to have private conversations, you could. And many people did want that. They walked in the door and they said, you know, can I ask the lab person a question? And I have a real stupid question, but can I ask that? I'm going to go off on the side and ask that question. And we provided that personal touch. And it was so very important and meaningful to the people that came. And we had over 100 people that came and walked in the door. So it was very important for them. They were free to circulate and choose whatever they wanted to do. They wanted to talk to one person or everyone. As a matter of fact, Pat and I observed that everybody that walked in the door spent time at every single table. And making the location convenient, it was very important for this confidential consultation. And then at the very end, we did something unique. We provided a presentation. We got up there and stood there until probably around 11 o'clock at night and answered every single question from the people that were left. So, you know, here's a picture here of the church and the people. And I find this picture awesome because there's people of all ages, you know, asking people and talking about their concerns and getting answers. Everybody who left said, you know what, thank you. Thank you for spending the time. And we admitted that we didn't know all, you know, one of the bullets here, admit what you don't know. We admitted we don't have all the answers, but we're going to come back and continue to educate you. And we'll share with you what we've learned from the summit in DC and what we learned today is important to us. And that's why Pat and I are here today, to learn from all of you. So holding the session as soon as practical was really important because people wanted the information. They wanted to be communicated directly with. They wanted to know what the sample number was and what that really meant to their health and their family's health. Involving a team of experts was so very important. The team approach I really, really, really enjoy. And that's something that if you don't have a lot of resources, you don't have a lot of staff or money, if you pull together the team of experts, the people that are passionate about protecting public health and the environment, then you can do a lot. You can do a lot with a team. So individual attention was so very important. Taking the time to answer questions, admitting what you don't know. It's important to have involvement from all levels. It's not just the state, it's not just the feds, it's not just the locals, it's everybody. And it's the community members, that they're part of the team. Providing understandable, updated, science-based information is so very important. And I leave you with this, trust is, I've heard this a number of times from people, either up here presenting or in the conversations in the hallways, is trust is important at all levels. So very important. I think we all learned that from Flint, Michigan, and we're certainly learning that now. So building trust and having that trust built is so very important. I want to thank you, EPA, for holding this, inviting us up here. For my commissioner, Dr. Raul Pino, he thanks you for having us here today. And I want to say a special thanks to Pat Bazzacki. Again, wave your hand. So without her, we wouldn't have anywhere near the information we have pulled together, and she's worked tirelessly to move this effort forward while having, you know, a lot more work on her desk, but she's made this a priority. So Pat, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lori, and I think it goes beyond trust. It's about trust and respect. I think that's the key, right? That goes to the nothing about us without us, because you have to respect that the community members have input that's valuable and are part of the team. So I'd like to welcome up John Schmelzer, the Hazardous Site Manager from Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. John.
I got to figure this out first. So there I am.
There you go.
Okay. Now I got to be smarter than the microphone. Okay. My name is John Schmelzer, and I'm with the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. And I'm one of the project managers that worked on the Bennington PFOA response. And before I go into the slides, I want to just give a little background of just the scale of our response. I'll talk a little bit through the slides to kind of how it started. But right now, after 2 years, we've sampled over 600 water supply wells, and over 300 of them had PFOA at concentrations above our standard of 20 parts per trillion. Since that time, we were very fortunate to have a potential responsible party that was worked with us as a partner, and we were with their help, we were able to install point of entry treatment systems on all the wells that were above 20, and the people wanted the wells. Believe it or not, there was a number of people that just didn't want a point of entry treatment system. They preferred to either drink their water or just drink bottled water. But I just wanted to put that in perspective. And in addition to that, right now we're in the process of installing water lines on one portion of our area, and we hope to get about over 200 people connected to water lines by the end of this construction season. Let's see if I just hit that. Okay. Okay, so how did this all start? You've heard about New York with Hoosick Falls. And that was going on for a few months, but up in our part of Vermont, we didn't really hear that much about it. But Aaron Brockovich came to Bennington College to talk about the issues at Hoosick Falls. And when they heard about some of the facilities that they thought were causing the contamination, there was some local residents in Bennington that said, well, wait a minute, we have the same types of industry that took place right here in North Bennington. So a state representative contacted our commissioner at the time and said, can we take a look at this? So what we did, we ended up sampling 5 water supply wells around this suspected facility. And quite honestly, none of us knew what PFOA was. We had to look it up and Google it to figure out what exactly we were dealing with. And we didn't think, we'd collect the 5 samples and then we would be done. But when we collected those samples, all of them were above a standard of at the time, it was an advisory of 20 parts per trillion that our health department developed. And we had some wells that were over 2,300 parts per trillion. And this is where I have to give our leadership at the governor level and our commissioner at the time that this happened. It was the same thing about Flint, Michigan. That just happened, and in Hoosick Falls, and our governor and our commissioner were committed, like, we have to do this right. And so within 2 hours of my fellow project manager that got the results, Richard Spees, the governor held a press conference to talk about the results, tell them what they were, and that we're going down to Bennington to meet with the people that week. So we had our first community meeting within a few days after that press conference. So what the message was to us, to our group, and I think it served us well, was to be transparent. And this has been echoed, this has been said numerous times. Say what you know, and if you don't know it, don't be afraid to tell people you don't know, but keep people informed. Be proactive as possible, and I'll talk about the steps that we took to be proactive, and then be responsive to the community's concerns. So this is where we started. And it's hard to see from the side here, but this is roughly where the plant is. And I give Richard Spees, who was my co-project manager, the commissioner said, okay, we need to figure out how much are we going to sample. So we were thinking, should it be a mile radius? And then he started thinking about, let's do 1.5 miles. And again, we were thinking we do 1.5 mile radius, we're going to capture all the contamination, and we're going to have a good handle of what's going on. And so that's what we started with. And so we had one of our contractors help us, and we started going out there and sampling people. And the way we handled that, we did it 2 ways. We got the message out through the community groups that were willing to sample. We wanted to make sure that we didn't impose on anybody, so we would only sample if they requested it. We'd set up a website for people to go and sign in. I mean, we got that going about a week into our response, but that first part, people were just calling us in. And then in addition, when we were out sampling, sometimes we would just go and knock on people's doors and explain to them what we're doing and do they want their well sampled. So that's how we got it started. So it started with that 1.5 mile radius. The other thing, and again, I give credit to our commissioner at the time. She said, you know what, I know in most cases when you do a standard site investigation, you collect the samples first and then decide what you're going to do in terms of giving people bottled water. But she said, look, we don't know what the extent of this contamination is. We know that we have contamination in these 5 wells. Within this mile radius, we're going to provide bottled water for everyone until we get a better handle of what's going on. And that was something that the potential responsible party agreed to as well. So I think that gave people a little bit of a sense of relief, a little bit, until they figured out what the results were. Again, at the time, we didn't know whether it was going to be, just in an isolated area or how big this problem was going to be. So with the communications, that was really important to us, and I have to say that this type of contamination, I think someone from New Hampshire said this earlier today, we have never seen anything like it, because we were finding contamination in areas that were uphill from where we thought the source was. So it took us a while. We heard that potentially there was airborne was a major pathway of this contamination, and the more and more samples that we took over time, it became apparent to us that it wasn't just your typical plume of a groundwater plume. There was something else going on. And so what we did, once we started sampling and we got the results, we went out and individually gave the results to the residences, knocked on their doors, gave them the results, explained to them what it meant, told them what we were going to do next. We made sure that we had a plan, and in working with the responsible party, we knew that we were going to put a point of entry treatment system on. We were going to set up bottled water delivery. And then the other thing we did is we coordinated with our health department. So once we went and talked to the people, then the health department ended up following up with phone calls to answer any of the health questions. And then the other thing too that we set up was an information center in Bennington. And I want to give kudos out to our Department of Health, especially the local office in Bennington, who were great because they knew a lot of these people. So they were able to talk to them, introduce us to them, and we were able to get a rapport with these people and when they came in. And we had a lot of people come in. I don't know what the count was, but we had our information center open 8 hours a day for about 2 weeks. And it was there for people to come in to see the results, answer questions. And that was something that I was really pleased how well that worked. And it seemed like it really helped people. And in addition to that, we also set up, we had people sign in and make sure that we got their email addresses. And then we did about once every, well, there for a while it was once a week. Well, actually at the beginning it was once a day. Now we're down to about once a month, but we try to give people information of what's going on, where we are. And then also we set up our website and to be able to give people information. We had public meetings, and to the governor's credit, he went to 3 of the meetings at the very beginning, and I think that really set the tone. And the other thing too that I want to add is through this response, we had an election. We have a different governor, and the thing that I was really grateful for was the next administration came in and pretty much took the ball running and just continued the same approach that we had before. And I think the community was very concerned about that at first. And there was, during that transition, and this is one of our lessons learned, one thing that I want to say is that even if nothing's happening, you need to tell people that nothing's happening. You should still meet and let people know. So we were discussing when to have a public meeting, and we decided, I think we should have one. And at that meeting, the people made it very clear that we need to have these on a regular basis. And then once they were able to see the new administration following the same approach that we took before, I think that helped people know that we're still on their side and we're still doing the best we can. How am I for time, Jim? Oh, there I am. Thank you. Couldn't see. I couldn't see the big sign right in front of me. So I talked a little bit about this, the PFOA response challenges, just the magnitude of affected area. I mean, we have a small state. I like to tell people, it's like our state is about the size of a mid-sized city. We have about 600,000 people. And then for having something like this happen in one of our communities, this was something that we've never experienced before. And I have to say, sometimes we felt like we were drinking water out of a fire hose. But what we tried to do is our major focus was to be transparent, be proactive, and be responsive to the people's concerns. Some of the responses, people were concerned about soil, direct contact, about gardening, about maple syrup. So within that first 3 weeks, we were able to go out and perform all that sampling to get a sense of what the scale was and get an idea of whether there was issues with those media. And in addition to that, we also did we did water samples, sediment samples, as well as sampling the fish. So we were able to get in that first 2 months a good idea of what the lay of the land was and where the major issue was. And what we found was that groundwater, that made the major pathway, which was the primary pathway of concern that we needed to address, was the drinking water pathway. And then again, I talked about understanding how the water supplies got contaminated. And again, this was something that was new to us, is this idea of airborne transport. And I remember I talked to my supervisor at the time of what some states are finding, and he couldn't believe it. And then once we collected soil samples, we were finding it everywhere. And so that made sense that airborne transport was likely a major mechanism. Now it's possible there's other sources out there as well, but it appeared to us that air was the major transport. One of the other challenges is the desire to have immediate answers. And I think if you learn today, this is complicated. And I know it's human nature to want to be able to figure this out right away. And that goes to us as project managers, it goes to our leadership, and it also goes to the community. And I think the only way you can get through that is by constant communication and developing a trust. And like, if you don't know the answer, tell people. And the more you do that, and I'm hoping that people realize we're there trying to help them the best we can, and we're going to tell you if we don't know the answer, but we're going to do everything we can to try to find an answer. And based on the feedback we've gotten from most people, I think they do trust us, but I also look at that as we still going to be constant vigilant. As my wife used to tell me, as I said, hey, I mowed the lawn. And she goes, well, what, yesterday? She goes, well, what did you do for me today? And I kind of use that analogy for when we're communicating, is that we got to have a constant vigilance. We can't sit on our laurels and what we did, because initially it was a sprint, now it's a marathon, but that means that we still got to do what we were doing that I think helped us develop the trust and to help the community, and we got to continue to do that. So this is what I talked to you about. Was we had 600 people or 600 wells sampled. So these are all the dots you see here. So this is about a 15 to 18 square mile area, and everything that is blue is non-detect, and everything, the really dark colors, the oranges, the red, and the yellows, that's above 20. And what I want to end with, let's see, this last slide does not want to go. So the other thing that we worked with Saint-Gobain, and I'll end with this, is that we were able to settle with them and with half this area, the area in blue, and we call that Corrective Action Area 1, and we're able to put water lines where technically feasible in that whole area. And in Corrective Action Area 2, right now Saint-Gobain is not willing to say that they're responsible for this, for that area. And so we're in the process of negotiating with them, because we believe that it's airborne transport, and it's very frustrating for the people that live in this side, that they're not getting water lines and everybody else is. And that's very frustrating, and they've expressed that to us. And what we have done is we have met with that eastern side and to give them updates periodically of what's going on. But they are frustrated, and we understand that. But what we tell them is that really the best way for us to get this resolved is to see if we can reach a settlement, because if we end up going to court, that takes a long time. So, but we're doing everything we can at this point to hopefully be ready. Hopefully we can convince the responsible party to also install water lines on the east side. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So while Karen Craver, who's the epidemiologist with New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services, is getting set up, it just strikes me that, communication is the key, right? Early, often being responsive to the community needs. In both of the previous presentations, it was the door-to-door, it was the community meetings, it was getting the information out quickly and telling folks what you knew and what you didn't know and what you were going to do about it. And I think that's key, and I'm sure we'll hear more of the same from Karen.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting our health department here to present. I'm Karen Craver. I work as a chronic disease epidemiologist at the Division of Public Health Services, which is part of the Department of Health and Human Services. So I want to start out just by giving you a little bit of context about where I work and about what I normally do and about what we at the health department normally do, because I think that context is important in understanding our response when it comes to PFAS. So the Division of Public Health Services serves as the state's health department. Unlike a lot of other states, our public health system is set up so that we don't have local health departments throughout the counties. We have a couple of city-level health departments in Manchester and Nashua and public health networks. And so that right there can sometimes create a challenge when we're trying to reach the local level, because we understand how important it is to be at the local level. But as the state's health department, we're almost entirely federally funded by grants, and we're funded for very specific strategies. And generally, we focus on high-impact prevention strategies. So it's important to note that while we're federally funded for specific activities, we also recognize that we're accountable to New Hampshire residents to address concerns. And so when something like PFAS contamination comes up, we pull together teams who are generally working on in other areas to address those concerns. And so in this case, I would say there were two sort of teams pulled together, one to assess the exposure, and that's what we've seen with blood testing, and then another team that I've been more involved in to address concerns about health outcomes related to PFAS. And unfortunately, and I have it up on this slide, and I know that it's probably very unsatisfying to see it, and it's unsatisfying to say it, but we don't have the tools or science to link the two. So what we can do is we can assess the exposure in a community, we can assess what's going on in terms of health, but we can't say that A is causing B, at least not us at the health department with the tools and resources that we have. So it's just a limitation that we face. So as a chronic disease epidemiologist, in my day-to-day job, I gather, analyze, and disseminate data. So I conduct surveillance at the state level and down to the county level. And so what I mean by surveillance is that we're really trying to understand the burden of disease in our state and the distribution of that disease. And we look at that geographically, but we also try to look at where our vulnerable populations are based on the social determinants of health. So our lower income populations, we know, suffer higher rates of disease. We also use data to better understand the prevalence of different risk factors throughout our state. So the reason that we do this is so that we can inform our programs, so that we can prioritize where we're going to deliver services and where we're going to target our efforts. But also, as I said before, we're accountable to our funders, we're accountable to New Hampshire residents, and we want to be data-driven. We want to make sure that the things that we're doing to have the impact that we say we're going to have, that we are reaching that. So we use our data to evaluate our services as well. And we focus on population health. And in working to address PFAS concerns, what we've really realized is that while the concerns are about community health, they're very individualized concerns. And so we've realized how important it is to try to understand those individualized concerns. So this is just sort of a laundry list of different ways that we have tried to communicate around PFAS as a health department. And they're not all mutually exclusive. Sometimes they happen in tandem or one following the other. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges that we face, but that's not to say that these aren't valuable modes of communication. I think each one of these has its place, but it is important for us to understand the limitations. So in the interest of time, I'm going to lump written reports and web-based information together. And so this sort of goes with our standard mode of communication. And what I didn't say on the previous slide that I meant to say is that we generally communicate in sort of a one-way fashion. So we put out reports, we put out data briefs, we make presentations. And so we've tried that in response to PFAS. So we've put out reports that summarize the scientific literature and that provide some somewhat complicated statistics to assess the disease burden throughout the state so that we can try to determine if the disease burden is higher in one area than what we would expect to see based on what we're seeing in the rest of the state as a reference population. What we've found in putting out these reports based on feedback from community members is that sometimes the information is confusing. And as I said before, there are limitations in what we can do with our data in that we can't link the exposure to the outcomes. So while we might be able to say this community has a higher burden of disease or what we would expect to say, we can't attribute that to any one thing. And so it often leaves people with more questions, and it doesn't quite get at the concern. They're also very formal, and I want to thank Laureen Allen and her fellow advocates they've pointed out to us in community meetings that we've had with them, and also I believe Laureen stated yesterday that sometimes the language that we use in these reports can come across as insensitive. So talking about statistical significance, we're putting that in there from a scientific perspective, but we know that not one single case of cancer or one illness is insignificant. Another challenge with reports, so in addition to them sometimes not answering the questions that we hope they might answer, is that as a health department, we struggle with being timely in getting data out there and getting reports out there. So as a health department, there's a lot that goes into analyzing the data and developing the report, and then rounds of quality assurance and review before we can release information. And sometimes that delay, I'm sure, can be frustrating and doesn't help us to build trust in the community. And reports, as I said before, are really one way. So once it's out there, even if there's confusion, we don't have that opportunity for broad clarification or to really understand what the concerns are about what we're putting out there. So the next thing that we've tried, and again, sometimes this happens in tandem with the release of the report, are state-led large community presentations. The challenges that we face with these are sort of similar to what we face with reports. So they're still state-led, so we're not really taking advantage of our local champions and our local advocates and community members who are close to the issue. And we're generally reporting the same data that we would include in a written report. And they're closer to two-way communication, where we offer the opportunity for community members to get up and ask questions and communicate with us, but we do recognize that not everyone is comfortable getting up in that sort of setting, and so it still doesn't get at that local communication. Let's see. The last three bullet points on this slide, while they're very different, the state-led community advisory groups, the state-led meetings with impacted individuals and families, in the community-led small group discussions, I'm going to link them together because they do have one common thread, and that's really sorry about that. And that's really getting at that local involvement and local level in speaking with people on a more one-on-one basis to really understand their concerns. So we can assume that we know what the concerns of the community are and try our best to address them, but until we're meeting with people more individually and having those conversations, how can we really understand what their individual concerns are and how can we possibly address them? So we have found these sort of meetings to be immensely valuable. We've met with residents of Merrimack, we've met on the seacoast, and we have had individual phone conversations as well. And we find that that two-way communication is really important. It allows for tailored clarification. It allows for people to ask the questions that they have. We can explain what we know and also what we don't know. Many people have said, it's an area where it's really important that we be willing to say what we don't know. That can be challenging. As someone working in the public health profession, we really want to be able to provide answers. But sometimes the best answer that we can give is that we don't know, but that we're working to find an answer. So these sort of communications are also a little bit more timely, I think. We're able to respond more quickly and immediately when we're meeting one-on-one with people or in small groups. And what I hope is that they build trust in the community. So what we've learned in our work in communicating around PFAS is that timely communication is best. So I talked before about the challenges that we face as a health department in being timely and responding. So I'm not saying that we've gotten there in being timely, but it is something that we're continuing to work on and will continue to work on. We recognize that with PFAS, where there's such concern and fear around the issue and what the potential health impacts are, that sometimes the gap that we create in our delayed response leaves room for that fear and concern to become amplified. And so we understand that timely communication is best. We also have learned that it's important, again, to be able to say what we know and what we don't know, to involve local trusted community members and to work with our community members. And along with that is that communication has to be two-way. And we really have learned that we need to focus on what can be done. So as a health department, it feels like we're often talking about the limitations and what we are able to say and what we're not able to say. But the fact is that we do have resources at the health department to address some of the health-related concerns that are associated with PFAS in terms of the other risk factors that are also associated with those health outcomes. And so I think we can be better about communicating what we can do, what we can offer, and what community members can do to protect their health. So what I'm most excited to share is sort of this, along this continuing evolution, what we're hoping to do moving forward, and we really want to involve community members. And I want to thank Andrea for speaking earlier and saying that that community members are stakeholders in this and need to be treated as stakeholders and recognized as stakeholders. What we're hoping to do is have a station-style meeting, that's a term that's used by the CDC. You can think of it sort of as a PFAS health fair. We can't speak to the success of this, although Lori talked about using a similar approach, and I've communicated with other states who have found this to be an effective method. But it's a health fair where we would pull together our community partners to allow those opportunities for two-way discussions, to allow for information sharing and resource sharing, and to invite all of our partners to be at the table. With PFAS, the concerns are so multifaceted, so it's impossible to think that any one entity can address all of the concerns. So what we're looking to do is pull together partners from the environmental sector, other public health partners, our local advocacy groups, our legislators, and to have this sort of health fair so that we can work together to address concerns. So that is it. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. So I just want to reiterate some things that I heard across all three of the states, is that their teamwork is important internally to their organizations, that the health departments and all the other stakeholders within the state offices are key. And you have to have the appropriate materials and information, right? I have to have FAQs and things that are written in plain English, and that timely outreach that's tailored to the needs of the community members is paramount, and that leads to trust and to transparency, and that leads to the success of communicating about a very difficult class of compounds for which there are no simple answers. So I'd like to thank the panelists today for their talks and really saying that, the panel before this with identifying PFAS and this one on communicating PFAS is really a good lead into the final panel, which is all about solutions for PFAS. So thank you very much.
He needs no introduction, he said.
All right, I'll try it right here. There we go. So my name is Sean Dixon, and I am Senior Policy Advisor at EPA Region 1. I work directly with Alex Dunn in Boston, and we're here to close out today, but that should by no means close out the conversation. As we just heard, it's absolutely vital to work across every sector throughout all of New England and throughout the country on this very, very important issue. So before we hear from the actual people that you want to hear from to close out today, I just wanted to walk through some of the things that we at the EPA have heard from both days' sessions. This is a summary of a lot of the note cards that we got from people in the audience, from a lot of the statements that we heard last night at the open mic session, and from a lot of the feedback we've been given throughout the entire session today in the halls and in the great conversations we've had offline. First and most importantly, I think that it's vital to acknowledge that the thing that we heard most clearly and consistency throughout the day was that this is absolutely a vital public health issue for our families, for our neighborhoods, for our communities, our towns, and our children. So that's something that we heard very much loud and clear, and we're going to take that back to this national management plan. Second, we heard a number of technical comments, thoughts, and concerns that fall into 4 or 5 broad categories. To start, we heard the need and the call to be more proactive with what we do at the EPA, to largely address and prevent any sort of future contamination as much as we can. Some of those concerns and calls for action include the idea of ending the use of PFAS family compounds in products throughout our economy. Another one is getting out in front of emerging PFAS compounds, and especially precursors that we are seeing entering the product stream as well. We need to engage the industry more to work towards replacement of these compounds and to flip the script on this safe until proven toxic standard of planning that a lot of members of the community expressed concern with. Finally, in this proactive approach to PFAS contamination, we heard the call for the EPA to develop a system so that when we are faced with the next emerging contaminant, whatever that may be, that we use the lessons learned here and everything that we're working through with PFAS and take those lessons and apply it to those emerging problems. Second, we heard a number of comments and thoughts focused on determining the scale and scope of PFAS contamination around Region 1. Specifically, filling data gaps on the persistence of PFAS in the environment, expanding testing across watersheds and not just in drinking wells, conducting more groundwater hydrology mapping to track contaminant plumes. Every ecosystem, every watershed is different. They behave differently, and we need to have the science ready to go to track this contamination wherever we find it. And working towards mobile labs, more lab resources, expanding capacity at the Chelmsford EPA lab, and maybe even developing home test kits. Third, we heard from all of y'all in the room that we've received risk and health protection research questions aplenty. We needed to focus on figuring out what to do with samples that come back that are close to but not over 70 ppt. We need to figure out what that means for our communities and our families. Where to find toxicity information online. Our ORD and a lot of EPA resources are growing in online information transparency as part of this action plan. We need to work on standardized health information sharing across all states, across all EPA regions, and across all offices, and to figure out how to analyze for and to what levels we need to protect sampling in fish, bathing waters, gardening, washing your food at home, and in sediment. So a lot of other media, there's toxicity problems, and we need to get a better handle on that. Finally, we also need to, in this world, figure out what other risks are associated with PFAS, such as depressed local economies, development issues, limited emergency response water supplies, air deposition risks, and fish bioaccumulation. Folding in things like European safety science and whether existing cancer cluster assessments have taken into effect emerging information that we now know with PFAS to be vital for public health assessments. We also need to address vulnerable populations beyond drinking water supplies, such as environmental justice communities, firefighters, and subsistence fisheries. Fourth, because of the ubiquitousness of PFAS nationwide and the lifelong health risks, we have heard countless times from the community and the states that we need to figure out what we're doing now about that. We need to figure out what we're going to do about designating PFAS as a hazardous substance, setting surface water standards, and establishing strict safety limits. Closing the gap between tests and our reactions to those tests so that there is no delay when we have to take action for public health protection. And figuring out how to ensure uniform response between states while at the same time balancing our limited resources that the states have and the EPA has. We heard from y'all that we need to figure out clearly how to ensure that the polluter pays. We heard that we need to figure out how to ultimately remediate this problem, not just treat it. Figuring out issues related to incineration, landfilling, and dealing with these contaminations so that they're out of the system is something that came through loud and clear. We also heard that there's a need to bring more blood testing capacity and potentially new Superfund site designations to this region and maybe nationally. And finally, we heard that there's plenty of ideas on how we can better work together, collaborating between communities, the EPA, states, and the localities. Figuring out ways to have standardized health risk information, working with doctors, working with the DoD, quickly developing this federal action plan. And we heard loud and clear, and we're committing to do so, to continue to work on all of these things with you, the states, the tribes, the communities, the neighborhoods, and the families. So with that, I'll turn it over to Peter Gravatt for a summary and some closing thoughts from the EPA. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So there was quite a bit there in a very short summary, succinct. I appreciate that. Of course, you can probably tell that we've had a number of people from EPA, both in headquarters and here in the region, who've been taking notes throughout the proceedings of last night and today. Not just Alex and myself, but also Alex's staff and my staff have been dutifully capturing all that we heard here. So I want to just offer you a couple of thoughts as we leave here in Exeter, and then Alex is going to wrap up the meeting for us. So some of these will seem very self-evident, and I will apologize for that, but I hope you'll bear with me. I guess the first one is this certainly reinforces the idea in my mind that this issue of PFAS is very, very important for EPA to be working on. Seems to go without saying, but I think everything we've heard just reinforces how important that is. Among the broad scope of things we have to work on at EPA, this is one of those that needs to be at the top of the list. And from Administrator Pruitt, you know, I'm here and Alex is here because he has said this is going to be on the top of the list. So just to give you that first bit of reassurance. The second is that this work clearly requires us to reach out to work and partner with others, and whether those be federal folks or whether those be folks at the state level or among tribes or in local communities or academicians or industry or all of you. This is something we have to do together. It's not something that can be done by ourselves for certain. And there's really no way that you can do this work from Washington and expect to be successful. And so that's why we're here and why we're going to be going to visit a number of other communities in the coming weeks to make sure that we fully appreciate the needs that you have in terms of the PFAS issues. Another thing that really strikes me as we're getting ready to depart is how important it is to remember that towns are not just dots on a map, and that people are not just numbers on the bottom of a sign that says, welcome to Portsmouth, or welcome to Barnstable, or welcome to Merrimack, or welcome to Westfield, or welcome to Bennington. That these are families, and these are children, and they're precious, and they're folks who have chosen to make their lives in these communities. And we're here in our jobs. We have the honor, Alex and I and our colleagues have the honor to be in positions where our jobs are to help to protect these families. And we take that very seriously. I think another thing that jumps out to me as a scientist, and EPA is made up of scientists and attorneys and engineers and environmental scientists. One of the things that really strikes me from this conversation is how important it is for us not to hide behind jargon. It's very easy to hide behind technical terms and jargon, which can really serve as a barrier between us and communities, and that we need to figure out how we can both be transparent, talk about what we know, but talk about it in a way that makes it as accessible as possible to folks who may not have gone and gotten a PhD somewhere, but have every bit as much wisdom and every bit as much interest in the issues that we're talking about. I also take from this how important it is the things that the administrator has already committed to, and I think we heard a number of states and a number of you at the community level reinforcing some of those things, like the hazardous substance listing, and like focusing on exploring development of an MCL and groundwater cleanup goals, and thinking about issues like the development of the toxicity factors for additional compounds, Gen X and PFAS, and recognizing that toxicity factors for those two compounds is not sufficient to answer the broad questions that we have going forward. From my perspective, in terms of the MCL, a big part of that information that we have that we fold into that is the results of the UCMR monitoring. And one of the additional things that really strikes me is that UCMR does not tell the whole story of the occurrence of PFAS in communities across the country. And we have to recognize that that's a robust data set, but understand that there's much, much more information that we need to pull in. And I think perhaps the thing that strikes me most of all is that where a community is impacted by PFAS, it can create just tremendous, tremendous challenges for that community. And we heard that those challenges certainly can include financial issues, cost and affordability of water, but they also can include issues around public health, can include issues around quality of life, property values, people's retirements, and fundamentally can involve issues around people's freedom to make the choices that they hope to be able to make, that maybe somehow now they find themselves limited as a result of some of these challenges. And perhaps most of all, I think I walk away from here appreciating how important it is for EPA not just to come out and meet with you, not just to listen, but to take action. That's what you're looking for and that's what you're counting on. And that's the conversation we'll be having with the administrator when we return, is about action and what we think this tells us about the things we've been contemplating. So I will say it's been a real honor for me to be able to be here with all of you. And I appreciate your willingness to share your stories, your willingness to welcome us into your community. And I know many of you come from different parts of the region, but to be here all together and spend all the time that you have with us telling us your stories. So a real debt of gratitude from me. And I want to turn this now over to my dear friend Alex Dunn. And I've been so pleased to be able to be here with Alex in the first community engagement meeting with you and your tremendous, terrific staff.
Thanks.
So please join me in welcoming Alex to the podium.
Thank you, Peter, for those kind words. I think that we're all meant to be in a place and time doing the job that we're doing at the time we're doing or playing the role that we're playing. And as Peter mentioned, we've known each other for a long time in lots of different contexts. And it's a real privilege to be in a place with Peter and with all of you to take action on such an important issue right now. None of us are on the sidelines of this issue watching unempowered. We all are empowered in some way. Some of you may have noticed that Peter and I had the opportunity to talk to a number of reporters, and I think many of you did as well. And one of them asked me earlier today, why were we here now? And I want to say why we're here now is thanks to Andrea and the community groups who came to EPA in Boston and said, we need to be a part of your process. We need to be part of the solution. They were doing exactly what they should do, which is making themselves heard and visible and interacting with, the quote unquote government in a way to say it's not okay to make decisions about us without us. And it was very impactful to me as someone who has worked around environmental and community engagement issues most of my career. And some of you may know I've taught environmental justice at 3 law schools, and so this was a real opportunity, I think, for all of us to practice what we preach, which is inclusion and listening. And it doesn't mean that we didn't work through some sticky issues today. In fact, I remember the first phone call we had about doing this the day after the summit in Washington, and at the end someone said, well, we have a month. How are we going to do it? And yet here we are wrapping up what I hope many of us feel like was a professional, constructive, honest dialogue. And we really couldn't have done it without the community voices. So would all of you who are here from one of our communities affected, please stand up so that we can give you a round of applause. You really make and are making a difference. I think as we close today, I reflect on a proverb that I used to tell my students, and it's been translated into many languages, so I'm not sure what country it originally came from, but it says, once your eyes have been opened, you cannot close them again. And it's a very powerful statement, I think, for all of us when we encounter new issues or a concern or another human being who has a concern. Once our eyes as fellow humans are open to the situation, the concerns, you can't really close them and not act. And so again, I think what you heard from Peter is that EPA is in action mode at this point on this matter. And we have the 4 issues that we've talked about many, many times: the development of, exploring the development of an MCL, the listing as a hazardous substance, exploring that regulatory process, finishing the toxicity levels for Gen X and PFBS, and setting the groundwater cleanup levels for PFOA and PFAS, the last 2 of which will be done this summer and this fall. And that will be helpful, but I know what we heard is that there's so much more that can be done in the interim. And I have a lot of notes, I know my colleagues have a lot of notes about other things besides those 4 things that may become part of that national management plan that reflect the true input that you all gave us. You know, one thing that we wanted to make sure you knew is part of having a regional forum is to remind you that you have colleagues, friends, people who have spent their careers or are maybe more short time at the agency like myself, who are passionate about these issues and working with all of you. So for all of you from New England, if the EPA Region 1 New England staff could stand up, just so you know who they are and maybe catch them on the way out. Some of them are already standing. They could wave from the sides. Sean. And this is only part of the team at EPA New England that have expertise and knowledge. Some of you have talked about Superfund sites. Some of you have talked about other drinking water issues. We have Jane Downing, the head of our drinking water program here. We have Megan Cassidy and Brian Olson from our Superfund program and our brownfields programs. We have so many different individuals, and all of those folks have teams of other people who can help answer questions. One of the questions we got before this workshop is, what would we do with all the information? And as you know, we are going to use it as an input into the National Management Plan, and we hope that for those of you who didn't want to get to the microphone, because I did listen to our prior speaker, and that may not be everybody's comfort zone to get up in front of a mic, that's very appropriate to recognize. We have the online feature. Please visit it. The website's on the poster in the front hall, and it's probably pretty easy to find if with a quick search. So please, put your comments in. So we will use them as the National Management Plan. You heard Sean walk through quickly the over 45 cards that we received by noon with thoughts. We have all the thoughts that you shared with us last night. And we're going to take all that and use it towards the National Management Plan. But imagine now EPA is going to go do these workshops in 5 or 6 other parts of the country. So that amount of input is going to grow. I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of consistency in what communities are looking for around the country. But also, we commit as EPA New England to be responsive to those of you who are here in EPA New England to help answer your questions as well. So for us, it is a continuing relationship with the New England communities. And I want to thank our state officials who were with us the entire time from all 6 New England states and the bonus want to be New England state, New York. If our state officials could stand, I want to thank you all for being with us. We could not do any of this without you, as you all saw this morning. So I asked one of my colleagues to just glance around the room, and there's over 180 people still here at the end of, I think, close to 10 hours of dialogue. Any of us who have spent a lot of time at public meetings know that that is a definite indicator of interest and commitment. So I thank you all. We promised that we would end early, and we will, as I'm about to conclude our program with time for you all to talk before you have to run out the door and resume your lives. But please know that this day and a half, we're not just a moment in time for EPA. This is a part of a very, very significant priority agenda for this agency. And we will be talking with Administrator Pruitt tomorrow and letting him know what we learned and reminding him or I guess commending to him or thanking him for putting this at the top of the list, because I certainly know we can make a difference here and we can make some change with all of you. So thank you for the honor and the privilege of working here on this with you. Also, thank you to our team from EPA headquarters. Quite a number of folks came with Peter and from our press office, and I would ask them to stand up, but I don't want you to think they all ran off. I think that some of them are out writing a press release right now about today. So, but headquarters and Office of Water folks, I really think they all ran out to do that press release.
No, two of them right here, stand up.
All right, stand up, stand up. Where are they? Where are they? All right. And the others are out writing the press release. So, so hopefully the fact that there was a lot of media here will encourage people to learn more about this issue. I know we're going to be following up as best possible with information, sharing the slide decks. Any questions you have, many of you worked with members of our team leading up to this if you were a speaker, so you have a point of contact. If you need a point of contact in EPA New England and you don't feel like you have one, our team is at the door and have lots of cards so that you can get a real human at the agency who can hopefully connect you with the resources you need. But again, thank you to everyone for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you for sharing, for your candor, for your honesty, and we look forward to continuing this journey with you. Thank you.